Hi everyone, it's Sam here. Welcome back to my channel and I hope you're doing well. And today I want to talk to you about a very important topic. And this is a topic that is guaranteed to have a significant impact on your life in the near future, regardless of your age, regardless of what you do as a job, and frankly, regardless of whether you want it to affect your life or not. And this topic is machine automation and how it's going to affect the labor market and the broader economy as a whole. Now, I started thinking about this topic back in 2015 when I read this book, Rise of the Robots, Technology and the Threat of a Jobless Future by Martin Ford. And I bought this book at the bookstore at the University of Science and Technology in Hong Kong. And I was there because I was attending my brother's graduation ceremony with my mom. And obviously this book caught my eye because I was thinking about my brother entering the workforce and I wanted to give him the best advice and recommendation that I could give him at the time. And I thought this book would be of help to me and maybe I'd give to him to read as well. And I gotta tell you, this book really caught me by surprise because automation and the loss of jobs as a result of that is something that I've kind of thought about in the past. I read some articles on it and I heard some interviews about it, but it wasn't something that I really thought about in the depth that I think I now recognize that it deserves and frankly demands, because it's going to have such a big impact on all of our lives. And when we think about automation and joblessness, we normally think about people in the manufacturing sector losing jobs and maybe agriculture as well, where instead of people putting things together in a factory, it's going to be robots and these people are all going to lose their jobs. And those people in the service industry or the white collar or knowledge work areas of the labor market think that they're kind of protected from all of this because there are certain things that robots can't do. And this book, having read it, really shed light on some of the nuances that I think we should all think about. And really, I don't think that there's going to be a single area of human labor and employment that is not going to be affected by automation. And you'd be surprised at some of the things that I read in this book. And this book, again, was written in 2015 or was published in 2015. And since then, a lot of things has changed. So when this book was written, things like cryptocurrency weren't even around. So, or maybe it wasn't as well known, obviously. Now, like I said, this is not something that applies only to manufacturing people, but it applies to everyone. So, whether you are a restaurant worker, a knowledge worker, or you're doing something creative, like maybe you're an artist or a hairstylist. Actually, I'll be right back. Excuse me. So where was I? Right. So getting back into it, why is this guy Martin Ford so worried about automation and unemployment and joblessness if he published this book in 2015 and it's now 2021 and we still haven't seen the level of unemployment caused by automation that he kind of talked about in his book? I think the last time I looked into it, global unemployment figures are north of 5%, maybe 6%. But economists think that most of that's due to COVID and not due to primarily automation. And if you look around, we're still seeing people work. We're still seeing taxi drivers drive taxis and people in restaurants working. And we haven't seen, at least where I live, the kind of automation at the mass scale that this guy talked about. And this whole topic of automation, it's been brought up by people like Andrew Yang, who was a presidential candidate who ran against Trump. And he said that, automation is going to have such a big impact that he proposed a universal basic income for US citizens at $1,000 per month. And that is a radical, kind of proposal. And, he actually made a lot of good points. Not all that I don't agree with all of them. But, he was one of the people that brought this topic of automation from the kind of outskirts of social discourse into some of the more mainstream avenues of discussion. But again, we haven't seen, people getting laid off left and right. We're still seeing people work. So is this something that we should really be worried about, or are people like Andrew Yang just using this topic to get votes and attention? Well, I think that personally, it's a little bit too early to relax, right? So in this book, at least, he talks about there's a few reasons why he thinks that it's going to be such a big issue. And the first one primarily is pervasiveness. So, information technology and AI and machine learning, all these different technologies, it, like I said, doesn't just apply to manufacturing jobs, but now it applies to basically all sectors. So he gives tons of examples in this book. So just off the top of my head, he talks about, in agriculture, there are machines in Japan where, there's crop picking machines where, previously they thought that picking crops when they're ripe was a distinctly human thing because it requires a lot of dexterity, using your fingers. And also you have to kind of recognize patterns and pick the fruit at exactly the right time, at exactly the right ripeness. And now there's machines that can, by color, see if it's ready to pick or not, and go through and work overnight and have 10 times the productivity of, a human farmer that's going through the field and picking crops. It mentions, things like, machine journalists, there's AI technology where you can feed data, for example, sports competition data, right, from a baseball game or whatever, and it's able to write up a decent enough piece of journalism where, a reporter doesn't have to be at the field watching the game and then, analyzing the numbers themselves and then writing this thing up. The machine can produce the bulk of the work, and then maybe an editor can come in and clean it up. It also talks about in healthcare, there's radiologists that are being replaced by machines because actually machines are much, they're not prone to human error because they're not human, and they do a better job at recognizing patterns and things like that. As long as it has enough data, machines are getting better and better at doing people's jobs. Now that's one thing, but another argument that Martin Ford has is that this time, technological advancement is fundamentally different from the past, right? So this topic of automation is not actually a new topic. So old school economists like Hayek and even Martin Luther King Jr. talked about this automation and unemployment that it's going to cause as a social issue. Back in the 60s and even before then, during the Industrial Revolution in the UK, there was this group of people called the Luddites that they were agricultural workers basically, or maybe they worked in textiles, and because of this advancement in technology and factories and assembly lines, they lost their jobs, and these people were really against technology. So what they used to do is break into factories and actually break and destroy all of the machinery and the capital because they thought that it was evil and it was destroying people's livelihoods and etc. etc. So this is an issue that we've been dealing with for a long time now as a planet, basically. And, at each step, we've managed to kind of get by, right? So when agricultural jobs got destroyed, new kinds of jobs came about, which is manufacturing jobs, right? People moved from the field into factories and started working, with long assembly lines and, textiles jobs, sewing and things like that. And after that, a lot of that was destroyed, and then the services sector really boomed, and a lot of people moved into call centers and various kind of became service providers instead of manual laborers. And so every time technology came about and disrupted the labor market, something else came up that gave people something else to do. But Martin Ford in this book talks about how this time it is fundamentally different. And he gives a few reasons why he thinks that's the case. The first reason is that technology before used to be something that increased the productivity of a person, right? So if there was one man and he had to dig the ground, he was a farmer, and he had to use his hands to do it, he would be very, very slow. It's not built for digging fast. But, if you gave him a shovel or something, it's a piece of technology, and it would be, he would be more productive. And, that's just one example. So technology in the past, for example, used to be an extension of a human function. The shovel becomes an extension of the man's arm. If you give a man an automobile, he's able to travel much faster, so it becomes an extension of his legs, and it makes him more productive. And that was always been the case. So even though technology came about, people were able to use technology to be more productive. But in this case, because AI and machine learning and all these things are getting so smart and intelligent, it is replacing the human being altogether. Now, we haven't gotten to that point. I don't think there is a machine that's actually smarter in general terms than a human being. Of course, machines are much, much more smarter than us in a specific, kind of area. For example, a calculator is much better at doing arithmetic than me, a billion times better than me. So there are specific areas, that machines are better than us in, but in a general sense, there isn't one machine that is smarter than a human being yet. But he's saying that we are getting close to that point. And when that point is met, when that point comes, some people call it singularity, some people call it convergence. There's different kind of names for it. But at that point, when machines actually become smarter than human beings, that's when it's really gonna happen. And that's when all this kind of mass layoffs and all these things will happen. And it's kind of like a tipping point. There's always a tipping point in everything. For example, there's a point where a jet plane hits supersonic speed. It's a very specific point. There's a point where water starts to boil. It's a very specific point. And so singularity or convergence is kind of like that. There's a point where machines become so smart, they have enough data and they have enough kind of machine learning capability that they're going to be able to do basically what a normal human being can do, or even better. And when that time comes is, when we should really be worried. And that time hasn't come yet, obviously. But, looking at the technological kind of landscape right now, I don't think that driverless cars are very far away. I don't think that, AI kind of customer support is very far away. We already have like Facebook chats, Facebook bots and things like that. They're kind of clunky for the moment, but, the more people interact with them, the better they get at sounding natural, the better they get at kind of actually doing their job of serving customers and pointing them to the right direction. So even things that we think are quintessentially human right now is being replaced by machines. A few years ago, I talked to my friend who was a tattoo artist, and I thought, well, this guy, I asked him, you should be okay, right? Like you're not too worried about machines and technology and things like that, because your job by nature, your job is quite creative. And he said, well, actually, yeah, thinking up the designs and things like that, that's creative. But actually applying the tattoos and, putting it on the skin, maybe that can be done with a printer, a tattoo printer. And if that technology is advanced enough, no one will really need a tattoo artist. They will just need a designer, right? And even that, machines are starting to do art as well. There's an example in this book where there's a machine that created this piece of art. It's a chair of some sorts. And what it did was it looked at emotional responses by human beings, and it categorized it, and it somehow found a way that, of producing some kind of art that has some kind of, intended emotional resonance with its audience, which is pretty scary. And of course, there's a debate about whether you can call that real art or not. Some people say that art is only art if it's inspired art. For example, if there's a beautiful picture of Mona Lisa, obviously that's art. But if someone makes a picture perfect, no pun intended, copy of that, and draws it out perfectly and replicates it, people don't really consider that art because it's not inspired. It's produced or generated. So, people say, oh, whatever is created by a machine is not inspired, therefore it's not art, it doesn't have artistic value. Well, I don't know. That's up to artists and people like that to decide. But my point is, that it's getting closer, and it's not going to stop getting closer, right? It's not an if, but more of a when. According to Martin Ford, another fundamental difference between what's happening now and what's happened in the past is value creation at scale. So basically in the past what happened was, agricultural jobs were destroyed, and then more people were needed in the factories. So people just moved to the cities and started working in factories. And when those jobs went, people moved to the service sector and started contributing as a retail clerk or a consultant or various service related jobs, right? But this time, where are people going to go? So because of information technology, one person or a very small team of people are able to produce so much value and replace so many people that just the math doesn't work out. For example, imagine WhatsApp, right? It was created by a small team of maybe 20, 30 people, I'm not sure, but it created a value, it created $1 billion worth of value when it was bought by Facebook, right? And now it's probably way more than that if you had to value WhatsApp. So, this small team of people created that. And imagine how many people had to work, a few decades ago, say in the 80s or the 70s, how many people a single mobile app called WhatsApp would have replaced, like all the people working in the call centers, all the operators, connecting people, they would have all gone. And this was done by 20 people. And basically, one piece of technology can be scaled at such a rate that it replaces an entire industry, right? That's possible. And so, when this happens, jobs aren't created at scale fast enough for people to move from one thing to the other. And lastly, another fundamental difference is something called the tyranny of the long tail. So basically what's happening is, now not only are jobs disappearing, but you're having to compete with a lot more people, and it's becoming more of a winner takes all kind of game, right? So for example, if you're a professor, back in the day, you just had to be a relatively good professor within your own campus, within your own school. Students had to kind of like you. You had to teach, a certain quality of material, and you'd be okay. But now, because of mass online education and things like Coursera and Udacity, there's tons of online courses available to students, and the professors that get represented in these courses are the top tier professors. So people can have direct access via these courses and online to the best sources and the best teachers. And so the utility of the professor that is good, but maybe not as good as these professors, start to diminish. And another example would be, for a software engineer, right? Before it used to be that if you were a decent enough software engineer, you could have a technology job within the US and you'd be fine. But now, you're having to compete globally with everyone, around the world. So there's someone in India who's much more hungry than you, spend 12 hours a day studying software development, and your company is saying, look, he's twice as good, and we got to pay him twice, we got to pay him half the money. So from the company's perspective, there is an argument of morality and social good, but oftentimes the argument of economics and practicality wins over. And so, this creates a bigger fat tail and combines all the kind of distributions of, hierarchical systems, and then it creates this one massive competition as opposed to, a regionalized kind of local competition. And so this also contributes to, a disruption in the labor market and, people having to compete much harder to keep their jobs. Not only are they having to compete with technology that's changing at, a crazy speed, but they also now have to compete with each other much more fiercely, and also have to compete with a much bigger pool of people than they used to. So, if you think about all these things, it gets quite overwhelming. So let's talk about what we can do. There's what kind of solutions do we have? What's been proposed, right? So, like I mentioned Andrew Yang earlier. So people and Martin Ford actually seems to agree with Andrew Yang, or vice versa. Andrew Yang probably read this book actually before he ran for presidency. So, these people say, look, these machines are creating so much productivity and they're so efficient, and it's creating a huge wealth gap, right? So for example, in the example of WhatsApp, these small team of people create so much value at scale, replace so many people, and in the process of that, they make so much money. And so, the income gap becomes wider and wider. You have this top elite tier of super productive people, and then you have the general population that's kind of locked out of, this level of production, because not everyone can be a tech entrepreneur or CEO, right? That's just not realistic. Or a super performing kind of coder. So because there is this gap and it's caused by technology, they say that we should tax the top people who make so much money due to technology, and then distribute that to the people. So Andrew Yang is extreme example. What he proposed was $1,000 per month to all U.S. citizens, to all adult U.S. citizens, and he said that if you do that, people will put their find things to do that are more meaningful to them, etc., etc. Now, I'm not a social scientist. I don't know, but just speaking from anecdotal evidence, I live in Macau, and Macau, actually, the government of Macau gives 10,000 pataques or more to all of its citizens each year, which is about a little over $1,000, right? So it's not $1,000 a month, but it's quite a sizable chunk of money, and this happens basically every year. And from what I've seen, what do people do with this kind of money? Well, I don't think that many of them put it to very productive use. They go traveling with it. Maybe they spend it on a designer bag that they wanted to buy, or a bicycle or something. But I don't really see them using it the way that Andrew Yang speaks about. But at the same time, he's talking about the U.S. This is a different place, and also, it's a different kind of economic environment as well. So I don't know if that anecdotal kind of observation is as relevant, but I don't know if universal basic income is the right answer. I think Andrew Yang actually did a podcast with Joe Rogan, and I found that really interesting. If you want to check it out as well. And another proposal to tackle this oncoming kind of wave of automation is education. People say, look, automation is going to wipe out a lot of jobs, so we need to educate people. We need to give them, instead of maybe not free money, but let's give them free college, free education, free resources to better themselves, to upgrade their skills, and to adapt to the coming labor market. And again, this is a noble suggestion, and I tend to agree that education actually is one of the best ways to upgrade or add value to a society. But you also have to think about this. If there is an illiterate society where basically people don't know how to read and write, or the majority of people don't know how to read and write. This is not the case in most places in the world now, but even just a few decades ago, there were tons of countries where literacy rates were very low. And when you educate these people and teach them basic things like how to read, how to write, and how to do basic arithmetic, how to maybe run a small store, things like that, a small amount of education can add a lot of value. So basically, it's kind of like a low-hanging fruit. But if you think about it, in the U.S., for example, because this book talks primarily about the U.S. labor market, most people already know how to read. Even the laborers, and even people who do kind of menial jobs, they all know how to read and write. They have a basic level of education, and so if you want to give them a level of education that will help them become maybe a computer programmer, or something like that, to adapt to this wave of automation, that is going to take a lot of investment, and then it's going to have a relatively smaller kind of return in terms of a social good, like a social return, compared to teaching an illiterate group of people a very basic skill like reading and writing. So I don't know if I verbalized that very eloquently, but basically it's going to take a lot of work to teach people how to learn the skills that it takes to adapt to this kind of labor market, and the return perhaps is not going to be as much as we'd hope, because you can argue, look, information is so available online, and you can learn anything online. You can take a cheap course on Coursera or Udemy and teach yourself how to program, teach yourself how to do this and that, and machine learning. You can be a part of the wave instead of getting destroyed by the wave. Okay, fair enough, but is it realistic to kind of impose that on people? I think it's definitely possible. A lot of people have done it, and if you have the level of drive and kind of determination, I think that it's definitely something that you should look into and pursue. But am I an optimist to the point that I think that a vast majority of people who are now doing menial jobs have the level of discipline and dedication and focus to do that? No, I don't think so. So maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know, but again, basic income or universal education, both very noble, but I don't know if they're going to work. Now, so what is kind of the answer? What can you do, right? So I'm going to talk about this from a financial point of view, because a job is two things, right? It's something that you do. It's supposed to give you meaning, but also from this perspective, we're talking about financial. A job is a means of getting money, right? Not only as a means of finding your passion or adding value to society and things like that. So as a means of getting money, from that perspective, what can you do when there's so many jobs that might potentially get destroyed, and your job might be a part of that? Well, the book actually touches on a few ideas, and I want to kind of elaborate on them. So the first thing that you could possibly do, or maybe not, this is not something that you can do, but it talks about how you can be immune to this thing, is basically you can transcend it. So if you look at it, automation is going to impact the labor market, but if you have enough capital that you don't need to participate in the labor market, then this is not going to affect you to the degree that it's going to affect everyone else, obviously, who needs a job, right? And that's quite an obvious thing. Like, it's not, and obviously you can't just decide to be rich and not need to work, right? But I'm just saying that this is one way where you can, it's like there's an ocean, and inside the ocean there's obviously fish competing and fighting and eating each other and all that, and that's the labor market. But if you're able to transcend it and get out of the ocean, and you're floating on the surface somewhere and relaxing, because you have enough capital to do so, then it's not going to affect you. So the book says that the class of people that are going to be pulled through are the rich. So basically the rich are going to get richer, or at least the rich are going to stay rich, right? Another thing is, well, another way of dealing with this, which is a more kind of, I guess, pragmatic way for most people, would be to become a really good specialist in your own field, where it's not going to, where you're not subject directly to automation. So what I mean is, for example, things like salespeople. A lot of salespeople are going to go. There are going to be more and more platforms that are going to put buyers and sellers directly in touch, and this applies to real estate sales, e-commerce, retail sales, whatever. A lot of salespeople are going to lose their jobs. But the salespeople that are not going to lose their jobs are the ones that don't do transactional sales, but they do kind of consultative sales, where they add value to the customer by giving them really specific and valuable advice that maybe can't be provided, as well through a generic kind of AI chatbot or whatever, right? So, or another example would be becoming a specialist in writing. If you are, although AI and bots may be able to create general blog posts and general news articles and things like that, but they're not going to be able to do, deep level research and deep level kind of writing and creating fiction, or, doing scientific research, or producing kind of very in-depth investigative journalism or anything like that, at least, for the time being. So that's one way. So if you want to specialize, there's no room to be mediocre in the future. If you want to be good, if you want to specialize and be a top, you have to be a top performer. There's no real middle ground anymore. Like, for example, the professors that I was talking about, you have to compete with so many people now, and not only people but machines, that you have to be really, really good. And another thing that really kind of ties into this is, even though we have to be really specialized and really good at our jobs now, there's forces that really prevent us from becoming that, and that is kind of distractions and digital kind of addictions, right? So we are not able to concentrate on one single task for a prolonged amount of time, like maybe the people in the past used to be. And I don't know if this is true or not, because I've never seen people from hundreds of years ago, but judging from like the books that they used to write, and then the books that they write now, it seems to me like the scholars and the kind of philosophers of the past, and they used to think much deeper, and they used to not have as many distractions. And so while doing what Cal Newport, the author, calls deep work is getting more important, it's also getting harder to do deep work. So that's another book that I can really recommend that you read is Deep Work by Cal Newport, and I think that book kind of talks about this as well. And if you're not going to be a specialist, you could go the other way, which is to become a generalist, but you can't be a generalist employee. That is a recipe for disaster. You have to be a generalist entrepreneur. So if you're not going to have a very specific skill and be very, very good at it and beat, generic machines and very talented people at it, you have to be generalist enough that you are able to be resourceful and pull people together and have a level of kind of leadership and management skill where you're still able to capitalize on new technologies that come up, and also organize people in a way that you're able to ride that wave and create value for society that way. So either you become very specialized and be very good at your job, or you go generalist, become very resourceful, and you utilize people who have become very, very specialized. So these are two ways that you could consider. One is not, maybe better than the other. It kind of depends on what you think is right for you. And the third one is a tricky one, which is to have a job, to protect yourself from automation by having a job that is basically immune from technological kind of revolution. It's so inherently human that machines simply can't do it. And a lot of jobs that people think are like that are actually not like that. Like what I mentioned, journalists, people think, oh, machines can't write, but yeah, actually they can. Or even like tattoo artists, oh, machines can't do art. Well, yes, they can. So you have to actually look into it. But I am sure that there are some jobs that are so human that you simply can't replace. For example, I might be wrong on this. These are just off the top of my head. Maybe a very high level artist, or a dance choreographer, or maybe a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst of some sort, or maybe a teacher could be but a teacher that is specifically working with children, because children need to work with human beings, right? And it has a much deeper implication. It's not about teaching information, it's more about the emotional connection. So things like that, maybe they will never be automated away. So maybe you could consider something like that. So in short, I rambled on for a lot more than I thought I would, or I thought I needed to. But automation is real. It's coming. And it's going to hit a tipping point, but I don't know when. it's you're reading, you see some headlines on the news these days that are just like pretty alarming. Things like Elon Musk talking about Neuralink, or using AI to go to space, AI, companies using AI to create pharmaceutical drugs, things like that. It's just getting insane. So, things are picking up, but I don't generally know when this huge kind of wave of automation is going to come. But, at least it deserves our kind of attention, and it deserves our deep thought, and, at least a level of preparation. Because if you have no idea what's going on and you get caught offside and this just hits you, I think it could be pretty bad, for you and your family, or, whoever you're financially responsible for. It could be a bad scenario. So, I think we all need to think about it. I thought about it personally quite a bit since reading this book. It's always been on the back of my mind. And I kind of, certain career decisions that I made, I made around this. For example, I'm a real estate investor. So that talks about, that if I build up enough capital through real estate development and investment, I mentioned, being above the labor market, I might be able to position myself in a place where, I don't have to work. So, no machine can come and take my job away because I don't have a job, right? So that's another thing. I also work as a real estate agent. I don't think this job is going to be immune from real estate, from machines. But like I said, if I'm able to find a way to add so much value and become more of a consultant than just a transactional agent, maybe, it's going to have a long-term future for me in terms of, helping people transact properties, but more from a consultative role instead of a transactional role. So maybe that's viable. So, have a think. Read this book. Read different articles. I probably, let me know what you think as well. I would love to hear from you. And I know it's been a long video, but if you watched this far, thank you very much for watching. And, I always welcome new ideas for videos and things like that. So, yeah, thanks. If you haven't already, please subscribe, click like, share this video, on your Facebook or on your Instagram. I would really appreciate that. And see you in the next video, guys. Thank you.